Hello. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about adding color to your Sanity Studio with simpler color input and other plugins. So I'll just gonna dive right in. So colors are used all across the web for all sorts of reasons. And kind of as an example, I want to use the Sanity website. So if we just like scroll through their homepage, you can see their different use of color. It's typically used on different websites to emphasize certain content or words or provide visual distinction between different areas on a page. So you can see here they're using like this red background color to kind of highlight the word content, or as you scroll, you can kind of see they use it to color this text or different background colors for some of these different sections. And so I've been building websites for just over 10 years and just have kind of seen a lot of similar patterns used in terms of color, just some of the ones I'm pointing out with like the colors of different words, background colors. And so now I work as a freelance web designer and developer and regularly use colors with my clients and in their websites. So I also use Sanity. And so I will be talking about the plugin I built to kind of help with adding color, kind of like you see, on their site. So even here, there's like red after this for the text color. So yeah, so Sanity uses it. Here's just some other well-known websites. Slack, you can see they use it even for like the text color here or different background colors, or Figma here, they even do the text color. So it's used a lot across the web. And so I built this plugin for Sanity called Simpler Color Input almost a year ago. You can kind of see what it looks like here, but it basically allows you to easily add a color input field into the Sanity Studio. So here you can kind of see it in use. You can pick a custom color from a color palette or from a predefined list of colors. And so I initially kind of like diving into, what prompted me to do this. I actually initially built this as like a local component in just my own like client projects. It wasn't a plugin initially, and I had just been using it as like a local component. You can build like local Sanity input components. And so that's what I did. And I was using it for like a few months. And then I decided to release it as a plugin from just encouragement from other people who were looking for something similar. And so since then, it grew into the plugin that I launched a year ago. And then it grew even further just based on community feedback, things that were asked for, or even things that members of the community added themselves. So I'm going to kind of dive into the story of how it's evolved first, and then go into some of like the code behind the plugin so you can see how it works behind the scenes, and then talk about what else you can do with plugins in Sanity. So you can kind of see this little like timeline thing down here. That kind of shows like the different iterations that the plugin's been through that you'll see. So before I get into those different iterations, there were three main goals that I personally had when I built this in the first place. The first one was I needed a like restricted color list that I could have like my clients choose from. And Sanity has like their own color input plugin that they made. However, there was no way to like restrict it to a specific set of colors. There was always the ability to do like a custom color. And so that's honestly the main reason I initially built this, was to be able to do that. So you can use a color list and restrict it to that. You also saw in the previous thing that you can do custom colors as well. So that was the first goal. The second one was just a simple user interface. So here you can kind of see it kind of in a Sanity document in line with other, input fields, so it doesn't take up too much space, and it's just very, simple. You don't see the different colors or anything until you click into it. I actually can't claim credit for the design of this. I had used a different content management system prior to Sanity, which I don't know if I should say the name of, but it starts with a C, and they had a color picker. And honestly, this design is very similar to theirs because I just really liked the way that it functioned. The third goal was that it would be simple to set up for developers to use. And so here you can kind of see what it looks like to use it. There's really two main steps once you install the NPM package. The first is adding it to the Sanity config, just like any other plugin. And then the second would be when you create a field, making it of type simpler color. And that's really all you have to do to get started with adding it to the project. There are like more additional customization options that you can do that you can kind of see here that we'll dive into, but you can specify like the color format, color list, or even enable search. So, but to start, you could totally just use it like this. So kind of diving into the evolution of it. So I launched this on June 1st of 2023. So under a year ago. And launched it. It was up on NPM and GitHub. I remember there was like an automated Slack message that sent in the Sanity Slack, which was cool about it. But yeah, that was kind of launch day, and this is what it looked like then. So initially it was a standalone input field that allowed for a color list if you wanted one, and or custom color picker. So here's, if you were to click on custom, what that color picker would look like. And yeah, this is what it was like when it launched, but very quickly I started getting people who in the community who were asking, well, what about an alpha slider? Like I want to be able to pick, change the opacity of the colors. So that was something I pretty quickly added just 6 days later, was an alpha slider to the color picker, which you can see here. Another one that was asked for pretty quickly was portable text support. That one took a little bit of time until I added it, but eventually I did. And so you can see here the portable text editor. And these two icons represent, this one is for text color and this one is for text highlight. And you can kind of see here, you can color text or highlight it or do both. And so I kind of made support for this and built the components so people can easily pull them into their own projects and use them in their portable text editor. So there was that. Kind of the next day, this is just an idea I had that I added, was default setting support. So initially you could only specify like settings for the color list or whatever in the actual field definition itself, as you can see here. And so you can imagine if you were using this field in several different documents, you would have to, with the same color list, you would have to duplicate code, which I'm all about keeping things as simple as possible. So I made it so that in the config file itself, you can specify default settings for everything. So you can have a default color list, and by default that applies, and you would be able to remove these options entirely unless for some reason you wanted to override the defaults. So that was November 8th, and then December 11th, I added color mode support, and this was also on request of someone in the community. But previously, that alpha slider I showed was turned on using this enable alpha Boolean. So you could say true or false, and they would turn it on. But when the data, this field, when you add it, it returns that data on your site for you to use. It was always being returned as I think a RGB or RGBA color or something like that, there was no way to change it if you wanted it returned as like a hex or a different format. And so basically this update changed that option so that you could specify any color format. So then if somebody picked a custom color in the picker, you could say, I want to receive this data. I want this data stored as an RGBA. So then if you didn't want like the alpha picker, it'd just be RGB, or if you wanted hex, it returned as a hex decimal, it would be, you'd put hex here. So it supports a wide variety of color formats. I think those are the main ones that are used. I also learned that there's hex A is a color format, which is like a hex color with opacity. I didn't know that was a thing when I was adding this, but that was that update. And this was actually a breaking change for the plugin because I changed that setting. But here was another update based on a request somebody made. So previously there was this like clear button that showed all the time on the fields. But if the field was required, it didn't really make sense to show it. And so I removed that field if the field is required, because then, somebody who's editing content might clear the color, try to save it, and, realize they need to pick a color. So that was just making the UI simpler on January 6th of this year. And then the last main one was this search feature on February 5th of this year. And this one actually was not added by me. This was added by someone in the community. I guess he, uses this plugin at his job, and they have a bunch of colors that they, need this search to be able to search for what they're looking for. So that was really exciting, just seeing like the plugin grow and add a new feature through, someone else and not necessarily me needing to add it. And even just like this idea that, I don't know if I had the idea to add a search feature. So those were like the main iterations. There were also bugs along the way. So down here, you can see like the smaller icons here represent some of the bugs that happened. And then you can see here in GitHub some of the different issues that people reported. So yeah, there were bugs along the way that needed fixed as usual with code, but those were kind of like the evolution of the plugin into what it is today. I'm really happy with like how it's grown. I think like I built the plugin initially, but I really do think the Sanity community helped build it to, what it is today by giving, making requests or even adding them themselves. So that's the story. And then here are kind of just some stats from today. So you can see the downloads on NPM here have slowly grown. The high was earlier this year. They were around like 4,000 a week. It has 20 stars on GitHub. And then there are 3 humans that have contributed to it and 1 robot. So that's kind of where it's at today. Who knows where it will be at in the future. But let's take a look kind of behind the scenes and show you kind of how it's built. So I have the code open here. And so essentially, if you've never seen like the build for a Sanity plugin before, this is kind of what it looks like. To build this to start, I actually cloned Sanity's color input and kind of made changes to it. And they also have like a bunch of helpful documentation on their site. I know there's like a plugin kit thing too that they have for building plugins, but I personally, I just cloned their color input and like made changes to it because I knew mine would be similar. But yeah, in the package.json, you can kind of see some of the dependencies that I used for it. The different Sanity icon library, Sanity UI, and then React color. This is what I used for like the color picker. But the way this is kind of structured, so there's like a source folder, and inside that there's an index file, and this is basically like the gateway or entry point to the plugin. And so this kind of defines like, hey, this is, what basically the different schema types that are available when somebody imports this plugin into their project. So there's the main one that I built it with, which is just the input field itself. And then after added the text color and highlight color for that portable text editor support. So this is just, kind of defining that structure so that when people import it into their project, they not like Sanity, their project agrees how to use it the right way. There's also these like schemas that kind of like define how they should use it in their like fields and kind of what the schema looks like for that. So the main one is this simpler color one. And so, it's an object based on this component, which I'll show, and these are kind of like the fields on it. So there's the label for the different colors and the value of the color. So that's kind of, where you do like the schemas. I'm like giving a very high level of this, but the other main files are just the component files for the color input itself, as well as the annotations for text color and highlight color for the portable text editor. So if you kind of look in the color input component itself, I'm not going to explain all of this, but the main things I want to point out are kind of just some of like the things I had to learn when building this plugin and like challenges that I personally had and what was new. Because this is like in React and like TypeScript, which is something I was like familiar with ahead of time. But there are things specific to Sanity plugins that I had to learn. And so the first one was kind of like, okay, what data is Sanity giving us from like the user? And that's kind of this like props object here. And so this was something I had to figure out and understand. And the main thing I used from it, which like you can click into this and see, they give you a lot of different information based on the user's actions. The main one like I had to understand was this like on change one. So this is what I had to call and use anytime a value, like somebody picks a color, because then when I call this, it will actually update like the Sanity data. And so I remember I was like, why, like when I refresh it, did the color not save or whatever? And it's because it hadn't actually updated in, the person's Sanity data. So that was like one of the big things I had to learn when building this. Another thing was just like the different types, associated with that, figuring out what the different TypeScript types were, because I decided to build this in TypeScript. And then the other big one was, so I wanted this to work with like the Sanity UI. And so Sanity provides like a component library called Sanity UI, like that. And so as much as possible, I wanted to use those components so that it would visually like fit in with that, or if people theme their studio, those like theme changes would show up here. And so that was challenging since I had never worked with that before, just figuring out which elements to use, how to use them. But as you can see, kind of this is where the component is returned. I tried as much as possible to use their components rather than, just like a normal div. So pretty much for all of this, I use their components besides for the actual like color picker itself. That was an external package. So yeah, feel free to open up GitHub and look at the code yourself. When I was building this, like I mentioned, I just cloned Sanity's color input. I also just looked at some of the other ones, like the typical like text input, which really just helped me like wrap my head around like how different plugins are structured, because this was the first like Sanity plugin I had built. I didn't know what I was doing. But yeah, that's that. And then I kind of talked about these as I was going into the code, but one of the challenges was just making sure that it fit in with the Sanity UI. So here's their like website about Sanity UI and all the different components. But that was something that I had to figure out. And then the other one was just like bugs that came up after I had launched the plugin. So there was one that happened earlier this year that I knew about. But I just like had not had time to fix it. I was busy, you know, with other things and just hadn't had a chance to look at it, and it had been like a couple weeks. And then I went into GitHub and realized that somebody had fixed it. So that was something really cool. And I think just powerful about having this be like an open source plugin is that this person had like went in, he actually updated this like plugin or this package that my plugin depended on. He fixed it there because that was where the issue was at, and then updated like simpler color input. So I was really grateful for that, because personally, I like did not know how to fix this bug. I couldn't reproduce it on my own computer. And so I spent, I think, a little bit looking into it, and then I was like, I don't have time. And so that's when I came back a few weeks later and was just really happy that somebody had fixed it. But, you know, bugs come up and you have to fix them. So in terms of learnings, I think I really learned through building this just the power of open source community and just how we were able to build it with their suggestions and also help in some ways. And also that it does take time and effort to build something like this, because people are reporting issues or using it, and there's stuff you have to do, and there's not really like monetary pay that I get for building this, but it is rewarding to do. And I'm happy that other people are using something that, you know, I use and thought would be helpful for me. Another thing is just that Sanity plugins aren't actually that hard to make. In general, it was a lot easier than I thought. And then the other one is that it doesn't have to be perfect for launch. I launched this with, you know, a few features, and then you can see how it kind of grew. I think I had the idea for like the alpha slider when I launched it, but I was like, nah, I'm not going to use that myself, so I'm not going to add that right now. But it was good because it made it so I launched it sooner rather than delayed that. So kind of moving into the last part of this in the last few slides is just why plugins in general. So Sanity has like a bunch of different plugins that you can use. Simpler color input is just an input field, which Sanity has like, there's a bunch of other plugins for custom inputs, which is cool. There's also plugins for like integration with other tools like Google Analytics. And so I personally use like a handful of plugins in my projects to just solve problems that I have more quickly and more easily. A lot of these are built by the Sanity team themselves or built by like community members. And everyone has like different use cases for how they're using the Sanity Studio. And so having these like plugins to choose from just allows you to pull in, you know, what you need to use. And it's really cool. Like if you want to scroll through and look at some of the different ones that are available. I was scrolling through it in prep for this talk and realized there was like a dad jokes one or like a cat one too. So there's some like fun random ones in there too, and also some helpful ones. But in terms of like, if you do find that there's not a plugin that you need and you want to make your own, it's easier than you might think. I like track my time for everything, and I built the initial plugin, simpler color input, in about 10 hours. It's helpful if you start duplicating the code for a similar plugin. And then there's some helpful resources, Sanity plugin kit, Sanity developing plugins doc, and then I'm happy to be a resource. I know the reason I launched this plugin and got into open source in the first place in the past was because of encouragement and help by other people. So definitely happy to do that. And then to end, here are some other cool Sanity plugins that I use. There are some other custom input ones for like code. There's other color ones, location info, SVGs, rich dates, YouTube, and more. And then just here are some other ones. I just looked through some of my recent projects and pulled these. But that's kind of where I'm going to end. So thanks for listening.